Appreciate it. So let's do this. If you went to, because the four of us who you see on your screen right now, the four of us all went to HBCUs. So if you went to an HBCU, if you could type the name of your HBCU in the chat, that would be great. If you didn't go to HBCU, but maybe you work at an HBCU, that would be good too. You could put whatever HBCU you want to represent right now. Go ahead and put that in the chat. You know, I'm mad because I forgot my A&T hat.
Aggie Pride.
Aggie Pride.
Aggie Pride, y'all. I'm loving it.
So we got some people from Jackson State. We got a whole bunch of Aggies in here.
Okay. We come hard.
Listen, I was trying to stay on mute, but I see right now, y'all finna get me riled up.
We got some people from Bowie State in here.
Okay. Right? You know?
Oh,
okay.
Oh, that's Amber. You Lamar. You Lamar on and Jackson State, Amber, and Tougaloo, but I know the other people get a chance to talk about it.
Tougaloo. It's all beautiful.
We got some PV people in here.
Okay. That's beautiful.
All right, we got about 1 more minute and then we're gonna go ahead and get started. We got 50 people here already. This is probably gonna be one of our like biggest, most attended events. So we thank all of you for your support, for showing up today. We got Tia Matkins here. Oh, Dr. Celie Ruiz is here. Shout out to Dr. Celie Ruiz.
That's my sister girl. She's always positive. Like, who wakes up positive and go to bed positive? I don't even understand it, but thank you, beautiful.
She gave me the best advice at one of the AERA pre-conference, like professional developments. It was pretty good. It was better than pretty good. It was dope.
Yes.
Real confidence boost. Okay, so we about ready to get started. So I want to thank all of you for joining us today. I'm going to give a quick, go ahead, Ebony, give you a shout out, Ebony. Go ahead, give you a shout out.
All my people are here. But go ahead, Langston. Thank you.
So I'm going to give a quick overview of Entrepreneurial Appetite. Then I'm going to hand it over to our host for the night, Dr. ReAnna Roby. My name is Langston Clark. I have been hosting Entrepreneurial Appetite for the past, 3 years now. We started off as a gathering of young professionals in San Antonio, Texas, trying to build community. We've evolved into a book club that since COVID-19 has transitioned online, and our goals are to build community, promote intellectualism, and support Black businesses. And so as we fulfill that mission this month, or for our second event this month, I want to introduce a great friend of mine, Dr. ReAnna Roby, who is, how do I say this? Dr. Roby was a doctoral student at UTSA during my first 2 years on the tenure track there. And so it's very interesting how our relationship is because if you looked at on paper, right, you might say that in terms of our careers, she's behind me, right? Because she was getting her doctorate while I was on tenure track, but she's still someone that I look up to and that I view as a mentor and someone who encourages me. And I have the pleasure and honor of having her as a friend and a sister in the academy. So I'm going to turn it over to her, and then she's going to introduce our special guest entrepreneur for the night before we get into the conversation with Dr. McGee.
Dr. Clark, thank you so much for the warm introduction. I ain't got no Kleenex nearby, and something I just knew, because this is my spirit being full. I talked to Dr. Clark this morning at 7 something, and I know he's nervous because he just called me Dr. Roby. And I know Dr. Langston Clark knows my name is ReAnna, it's Roby. But I know he's nervous because he told us, but neither here nor there, it's all love. Welcome tonight, y'all. I'm so excited to facilitate this conversation. And first we're gonna start with a special feature with my sister from the great state of Mississippi, not just any part of Mississippi, but she's from Jackson, a graduate of Lanier High School, class of 2006, like me. And not only did she did all that, right? She is a graduate of Lamar Owen, also a graduate of Jackson State University. Swag love on tonight, but you know how it is any other time. And she is the first Black woman to graduate with a Ph.D. in computer science from Purdue University. Now, while those things are all amazing around what she do, that's not who she is. She's so much more than that. So join me. Y'all put some hearts in the chat. Let's light it up, and welcome in my good sister, Dr. Amber Johnson. Amber, how you doing?
I'm doing good. That was a no, how hard it was for you to say all of that. But I am a very proud graduate of Jackson State and all the other 12 schools you named. But I'm excited to be here. I appreciate having me.
Okay, cool. So like I said, like I mentioned, I just talked about a little bit around these places that you graduated from and where you from. But can you tell us a little bit more about who you are and how you've navigated your path into the adult life brand?
Yeah, sure. So as you said, I'm from Jackson. Was born and raised in Jackson. I attended 3 HBCUs actually. So I actually started out at Tulu, and I played basketball and ran cross country. So I was on a full athletic scholarship and then partial academic. So after I graduated from Lemoyne, I went on to Jackson State, and I was in a program called the LS MAP, Louis Stokes' Alliance for Minority Participation. They gave me a lot of money. Let me not mess this name. But the LS MAP program was super awesome, and it prepared me for my PhD at Purdue. And so after I graduated from Purdue, as you said, I became the first Black woman to earn a PhD in computer science. I created the Adult Life, and the Adult Life is about being who you are, no matter where you are. And it stemmed from my experiences in that I was completely myself in an environment that wasn't necessarily created with me in mind. And so, there's no code switching or, dimming my light or, just becoming someone else. I took my whole self into that environment, and in turn that transformed that environment as well as myself. And so thinking about the adult life, as kids, we are super, super curious and just fearless until, society puts these labels on us, or we have some experience and we kind of lose that. And so I was like, why can't we be like kids? Like, why can't we, just like, because kids are going to be kids no matter where they are, no matter if you want them to be or not. So I think that we all have gifts, and we have gifts for a reason. And so by us not being ourselves, we're not truly embracing those gifts. And so, so I created the Adult Life.
Thank you for that, and especially for the explanation, because I know when I see the brand, and I was thinking like, that's because we all big kids, right? We all big kids just living in grown people bodies. And I remember one of the things I used to tell my kids, so my college students, when I'm teaching, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Because reality is we always growing and we're always learning, and like having that kind of, I think, point of view or perspective around how we might engage life presents different opportunities for us to imagine, particularly for Black folks and Black women. So given that it is Women's History Month, and I know that we are all members of Divine Nine organizations, I want to know a little bit around how you see, sisterhood showing up for you, or being a part of how you are sustained.
Yeah, so I mean, so looking back on the mentors that I've had and just the environments that I've been in, I think mentorship is extremely important. And that mentorship and just the support system has gotten me to this place where I am now. And so, I mean, there are so many, even now, like I never really meet a stranger. So I've met so many people, friends of mine, so many people who support the Adult Life, and even before then. So for instance, Dr. Jamaica Burge, who is super amazing. She is one of the founders of Black Compute Her. I met Dr. Burge maybe about 7 years ago when I first started my PhD, and I was almost in tears. Like, I was struggling. And I met her at a conference. We started talking, and we were on our way to a session. We ended up sitting down on the couch and talking for like 2 hours, crying, sharing stories. And at the end of it, she was like, here's my number. If you ever just need to get out of Indiana, I will fly you to DC just so you can, get away. And if you need to come and write or do whatever. And so I've met so many people like that. And the bulk of them have been Black women who have been in the same position that I've been in, who's already blazed these trails, and some who haven't. And so, I mean, I can't thank my friends. I can't thank Black women that I don't even know. There are people online who are rooting for me, and I'm like, y'all haven't even met me. But I appreciate it so much.
Yes, thank you so much for that. And so one more time, you know, as a Black girl from Mississippi, or as Black girls from Mississippi, that comes with, you know, it comes with, for other folks, right? When they read you, it comes with some different types of readings and projections around you, around like how you might perform in the world and how you might show up. And I know you mentioned like how the brand allows you to show up authentically, regardless of who you are. But I think I want to know, how do you see your work? And even though you're now removed, like kind of removed from Mississippi because you don't necessarily live there anymore, how do you see your work as a way of paying it forward, or still supporting and being a way to honor the folks who have supported you along the way, particularly those folks back home?
So Mississippi is always in me. Let me say that. It's always in me. And I even fought hard to like keep my Southern drawl. So I would like be on my way to class and I would call my grandma or somebody just to talk to them just so it could come out, you know, like I'm not losing this. But no, so I think just me existing, people like myself, Sheena Allen, people from our generation, Sheena Allen and Dr. Nashley Stifles, Dr. Key Hammond, who are all from Mississippi, who are doing amazing things. Just by showing up, I think we are representative of, you know, what's possible of our ancestors. We have people like Fannie Lou Hamer, who's, you know, from Mississippi, there's no adjective to describe her. So we stand on, you know, her shoulders and others. And just so by us, like just doing what we do. I'm also a part of a different non-for-profit. So I sit on the board for Tech Club, which is a non-for-profit based in Mississippi that teaches kids computing concepts through sports. So I'm still in the community. I'm still there. Like I'm not removed too much. So yeah.
Well, that said, I want you, if you would, before we get off, can you tell folks how to find you, how to follow you, and how they could be supportive of your brand? I know Dr. Clark can drop some things in the chat for folks, but could you go ahead and just share right now, how can folks find you and stay in touch with you after this conversation today? And how can they, like I said, support the brand as well as the mission of Kidult Life, as well as anything else you have going on along the way?
So first, I'd like to say I appreciate you having me. I currently have a fundraiser going for Black Girls Code. So I have a t-shirt available. If you check out the Instagram or even the website, it's on there. You can also make donations that'll go directly to Black Girls Code. But if you buy a t-shirt, you get a really dope t-shirt as well. The proceeds go to Black Girls Code. So you can find me at thekidultlife.com. That's the website. And The Kidult Life, TheKidultLife, on all social media platforms, except for MySpace. I don't think it exists anymore. And I am Call Me Rudy on Instagram, and I Call Me Rudy on Twitter.
Well, thank you again, Dr. Johnson. I'm gonna use your titles because first, being the first to do a thing is always beautiful. I can say that personally too, because I was the first Black woman to graduate with a Ph.D. out of my program, right? So being the first, you know, it's major, but at the same time, I think it's a reminder around why we're here tonight to talk about this book in my lap. And so we're gonna transition to the conversation with Dr. McGee, and I just wanna send you all the love. All the love. It's storming down here right now, but you know what it is. So let's keep it moving. Thank you. All right, so I gotta take a little breath because I'm really excited. Backstory, I'm a storyteller. That is my research method, whether it's like storytelling to tell the story or storytelling to try to make sense of the culture of the space that I'm in. But right now I'm gonna tell a story to introduce Dr. Ebony McGee, who is our featured panelist and the author of Black, Brown, and Bruised. So when I was the first Black woman finishing my Ph.D. in the Interdisciplinary Learning and Teaching Department at University of Texas at San Antonio, Dr. McGee was an external member of my dissertation committee. And I would meet Dr. McGee in 2015 at Vanderbilt University, where we both just so happen to be employed now during the Critical Race Studies and Education Conference. And what I learned about Dr. McGee within the context of that meeting, because at the time I think I was still at Washington State, because Dr. Paula Groves-Price, who is now at A&T, it's interesting how these circles are just, converging on each other, was like, yeah, I think you need to your work needs to be in conversation here. And I was thinking about, well, what does a critical race science look like? And then I meet Dr. McGee, who was doing this work around critical race engineering, like thinking about critical race studies and engineering. I was like, that's what I need to be. And my advisor at the time, my dissertation advisor and forever mentor at the time, Dr. Theodora Berry, was like, you need to know her. And it's one thing for you to just walk up to her and say, hey, how you doing? It's another thing when I introduce you, right? And then we can develop these affinities. What I didn't know at the time, because I had not formally met Dr. McGee, is that she was a Delta, and my dissertation advisor was also a Delta. So shout out to the Deltas, the sister Greeks. And I found out that week, the weekend was critical race studies. The following week would be the Edify meeting, where Dr. McGee was hosting a whole slew of scholar activists who were engaging and thinking about what does critical race theory, what do critical theories, not just critical theories, give us or provide for us to think about the roles of folks in STEM, particularly engineering. And so Dr. McGee allowed me to stay past the conference to support the work that they were doing. And from that moment on, she has been somebody who she was somebody I admired from a distance, but now it's like it's intimate and it's real and it's close. And at this point, I'm fighting tears a little bit, even though I generally don't apologize for tears. I'm not apologizing now. She's invited me to co-lecture in her class. She has made room for me, right? And I think about what it means for us to make room for each other, not just to do work, but to celebrate each other. And I could not be more excited to facilitate this conversation tonight with someone who is near and dear to me in so many different ways. Please, y'all, join me in warmly welcoming Dr. Ebony McGee. Put some hearts in the chat. Let's light it up for her, because she deserves all the things right now as we get ready to jump into this book discussion.
Thank you so much, ReAnna. You are so, so kind. You've always been such a kind and warm spirit. And you know what? When we think about, being doctors and doing this academic thing, please don't ever lose that. Let that carry you far. I want to thank Langston for, inviting me, reaching. And I said, yes, I didn't know he had a whole podcast, and he did these things monthly. And Amber, Dr. Johnson, I am going to the website as soon as this ends, Happy to support you. For everybody on the chat, I am looking at the love. I'm loving the love. Aggie Pride, HBCU Pride, Divine Nine Pride. If you support someone who went to the HBCU, Pride for that. Pride for our Black and Brown STEM educators. Just really, really happy to be here, and thank you for having me.
Sure thing. So I want to ask this question around how did you get here, in the kind of within the key of Deborah Cox, but also I'm thinking of specifically within the context of this book. So can you tell me, how did we get here, and specifically what has been your path to get into writing this book, Black, Brown, and Bruised?
Okay. So I like to tell people I'm a recovering engineer. And I say that because the bruises of me and my engineering job, they are still with me to this day. And if you talk to other STEMers of color, they have very vivid experiences of when they were shown that they were not enough. No matter how much they did, they were just simply not enough. And the degree didn't save them, the PhD didn't save them, the titles didn't save them. But I wanted to better understand that even if they were at they had traditional forms of success. And I put success in quotes because success doesn't mean you have a 3.8 GPA, but you're in the hospital for Bell's palsy because of your anxiety attack. That's not success. So, but traditional forms of success, I wanted to know, how do we manage and survive these brutal academic STEM climates, and what does it cost us, right? Because when you're high achieving, you never think about, this is hurting me, right? We're the ones on the front of the website, we're the ones on the diversity paper, we're the ones getting the awards, but there is a cost to living and surviving in a toxic environment that, first of all, wasn't made with you in mind. And that was made to actually solidify that you will be forever inferior. So that's how I came into this book. And I say, we're bruised, but we're not broken. So like, that's my shirt that's coming out. We are Black, brown, bruised, but we're not broken. But don't ignore our bruises. You know, just because we know how to cover it up, like just because you're good at code switching or assimilating or whatever you have to do to get by, doesn't mean that, you know, this is acceptable. We are hurting, right? And recognize that, you know, despite the awards, despite the accolades, that you need to recognize and atone for our pain.
Yes, thank you for that. Thank you for that. And so I'm wondering, particularly because I know, like you mentioned, you come from engineering. Now we over in colleges of education. I come from chemistry, and now I'm in a college of education. I guess I'm wondering, how do we see like this book being in conversation, right? With all of the stuff that comes out of like education, particularly like K-12 education and higher ed education, and the storm is rolling again, so my light's flickering. So I'm praying that we can, yours too. Yes. I'm praying you don't lose power. But like, how do you see your book in conversation with the folks, the traditionalist folks over in education, and how do you not see it in conversation with them?
You know, I am so sick of let me just have a moment here. I am so sick of math educators, you know, salivating over the equal sign or over some algorithmic, you know, processes, and, you know, maybe even the curriculum, which gets closer to the kind of culturally affirming curriculum that I need, but they don't say anything about a student in a physics lab working for 16 hours a night, or a woman who's just had a baby and needs to breastfeed, and the advisor says, you know, you don't have time for that, right? So there is so much that happens within our education and within the workplace that we are not atoning to, but people, you know, want to just salivate over, you know, things that I'm not going to say it's not relevant, but God damn it, we are hurting. We are suffering over here, right? And you can't, I don't care how many yoga massages or $24 smoothies you get, like you cannot self-care yourself out of this toxicity of the environment that is actually making you toxic. So one of the things I talk about in my book are the mental and physical health ramifications. Now, we spend a lot of time talking about mental health. And I mean, it is a surefire thing. Like, I have a therapist, I believe in it. But what about the physical health complications? So right now we have lawyers, doctors, people with PhDs still dying 5 to 6 years sooner than their white counterparts. So when we celebrate Black success, what we are really celebrating is premature death. Now, I'm not saying this to exaggerate or anything, but we as people, as Black people and people of color, we have to stop working ourselves to death, because guess what? We found out no matter how hard you work, people will still have these lower expectations of you, and you can't work hard enough to keep up with the pace of their superiority. You just can't. So what we need to do is we really need to take care of ourselves, you know, mentally, and some of the ramifications, you know, will be physical wellness, but we often talk about the mental health and we don't talk about physical wellness. Let me just give you a couple of examples. So I mentioned Bell's palsy. This has happened in every institution that I've done interviews with, including HBCUs. So although we love our HBCUs, you know, we also need to be attentive to the mental and physical health complications that happen in there. Because when I went to North Carolina A&T State University, Aggie Pride, what I was told is you still have to work twice as hard because the outside world will not believe in you. Although we believe in you, they won't. So I was still, you know, compromising, getting up and going to take a run or going out with my girls and, you know, having other things that helps me, you know, thrive, not just simply survive. So other mental health complications, young girls, barely in their 20s, having miscarriages, young girls having fibroids, 25 and you have fibroids, young men being hospitalized for exhaustion and anxiety attacks. We don't want to talk about the brothers and the anxiety attacks, but it is going on. There is something happening with our Black men. And, you know, we feel that solidarity with the brothers, you know, our thoughts and ideations of suicide with 4.0 GPAs. So sometimes STEM educators who I love, it ain't the STEM, right? It's that environment, man. You have a culture that is set up for us not to believe. And then what do they pump to us? Oh, you have imposter syndrome. It's in your head. You know, syndrome means your elevator don't go to the top floor, right? Syndrome means that there is something in your mind that you're just like a little crazy. And this is so damaging. There is nothing wrong with these kids. There are nothing wrong with y'all on this line. This place is set up to be toxic. You feel it, you see it. You are not crazy. It is not in your head, and it is not your job to fix. If the environment is imposterous, why is it the student's job to fix themselves while the environment remains the same? So this is why I shift from my dissertation, looking at resilience and looking at grit, to say, God damn, how gritty do I have to freaking be in order to survive in these environments? So see, now I realize, okay, I'm just gonna say this last thing.
No, come on. It's good. Keep going. You're doing good.
I realize resilience is not a do-it-yourself endeavor. You are not supposed to rely on resilience day in and day out, okay? There's supposed to be external supports so you can be resilient just like the white, rich, heterosexual male sitting beside you, right? But we use grit and resilience, and now we're told to use it. Like this is what they tell us to do. They don't say, no, we're gonna change this environment. They say, you have to just lift yourself up a little bit more. Or you have, you know, Black neoliberals who say, well, I had to do it. You know, it was hard for me, you know, but I made it, and it was just one person. Now you got three. And I'm looking back like, well, if 25 years ago, you had to do that, and 25 years later, we still here, why is that my problem? You know? So we really, really need to have more hearty critiques about the structure that is allowing us this premature death, using Ruth Gilmore's definition of racism. I'm gonna stop there.
You know, you in your bag. You in your bag, and I just want, we can stay here. Because I think one of the things you just got it, because you named it racism, is like, the reality of it is like existing in anti-Black racist spaces, existing in white supremacist spaces is constantly assaultive, right? It's not just assaultive to like my personhood, but my whole being, right? And how I can show up. And so when you talk about in the text, the early death, it reminded me, I think it was back in 2014 that Bill Watkins passed. And 2015, my mentor from Washington, Dr. Florida, passed. Now these folks, these are Black men, right? Who had been doing all the things, had been trailblazers. I was like, this just seems early for folks to be dying.
Very
and
early.
Yet, what we know is the work, they were so into the work they were doing that we can say it was handed. I think it gets into not only like the formality, like how does white supremacy kill within the context of higher ed, but here we are, you have a chapter in the text where you talk about the COVID pandemic. We can see direct correlations, if that's the kind of research you went to, around how the health outcomes for Black and brown folks who were exposed to COVID, gave them very different abilities to be able to live past COVID, right? And how essentially it led to their demise. And so I guess I'm wondering in another lane, because you got into you coming through all the questions that I got, which is awesome. This idea around meritocracy, right? And how, oh, well, if I can get it all, right? If I can get my credentials, and I'm saying this specifically because now we like social scientists who are adjacent to STEM, right? And still very prevalent with this STEM context is like, well, if I get all the degrees and I get all of the grants, can't nobody beat me. So how do we, I guess I'm asking that question is like, how do we speak to this, to really dismissing and debunking this myth of meritocracy within the context of STEM environments that I think does nothing more than reify some of the bruises and some of the trauma?
You know, meritocracy is a very capitalistic notion in the first place. And we're very communal, collective people. So the fact that one has to just do hard work and persevere and rely on some kind of inner strength is not even a characterization of Black people, right? We are, you know, first of all, now that I'm a professor, I barely do anything alone. I mean, I got to write one paper by myself every year, and everything else I do in conjunction with my students and with my people, right? So, you know, even the very notion of that needs to be troubled when it comes to communities of color. It is a capitalistic, individualistic, white supremacy notion, right? And it doesn't mean, see, this is the thing. I bought into this at one time, right? You know, we need to reveal, I've never been to jail, but I didn't straight up been institutionalized and colonized, right? So we have to have, so I had to have a moment to myself to understand that it doesn't really matter how hard I work and how much I achieve, it will never be enough. And once I figured that out, I decided, you know what, I'm gonna do what I wanna do. You know, I know I still have certain measures to make. I enjoy my professorate life, you know, but I'm going to carve my own space. And the way I've been able to really do that is by getting my own funding. Because when you got your own money, them folks, they what can they do? You know, they're not checking for you in the same ways in which, you know, if you didn't have that funding, they would be. But I also want to say that that's the same thing about self-care. So I just want to have a moment and talk about self-care. So what about my neighbor's responsibility to care for me? What about you, ReAnna? You care for me, right? That's not self-care. What about the government's responsibility, which we pay taxes into? So that's our money, right? What about their responsibility to care for me as a Black woman who are disproportionately affected by all four to 10 pandemics: poverty, COVID, anti-Blackness, and environmental racism? What is the government's responsibility, right? We have to stop thinking. And I do believe when Audre Lorde was talking about self-care, she wasn't talking about, you know, a bunch of massages in your favorite yoga position. She was talking about collective action. But you remember self-care started from disability studies, where some disabled people were able to do certain things by themselves, like brush their teeth and wash their face. But that didn't mean that the caregiver was gone. She was just in the back getting some coffee because dude could brush his own teeth. Then you got to the Black Panther Party, where they used the term self-care to define testing for certain diseases that were prevalent in the Black community. That's how they talked about self-care. So this kind of capitalistic, individualistic notion of self-care, where you pay all these taxes, but you don't expect the government or your society to care for you, I really think that that needs to be dismantled. So it's kind of like meritocracy and everything else that comes out, the next hot thing that'll be out, you know, where thus you are responsible for doing everything while the system either remains the same or it gets worse. So I don't even know where that came from, but I just felt like I needed to say it. It's on my heart. It's good.
It's good. Let's pour from our hearts tonight. What is it? In the text, you get into this piece around, you know what? At the end of the day, this is not sustainable. I want to use your specific words because it's at the beginning of chapter 6, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let me be very clear. The entirety of STEM higher education needs to be dismantled, period. And so when I was reading it line, it immediately took me to, I just finished The Prophets not too long ago, but it also took me to some texts like they get into this idea around during enslavement, when we get rebellions, the question is around like, we need to burn the plantation because this does not work for us. And then there being folks who are like, well, how are we gonna work? How are we gonna survive if we get rid of the plantation? What do you say to the peers, right? Who are thinking like, well, actually we just need to patch the pipeline. We actually just need to get some more y'all up in here, because if we just get some more bodies, and we know that's not the answer, but if we just get some more bodies on top of bodies in here, then the work will be done.
Yeah.
How do you speak to this?
So the foundation of STEM. So STEM was founded under principles of eugenics. The coefficients that we use, the Pearson the Fisher coefficient, the Pearson correlation, all of those guys were eugenicists, right? Mm-hmm. So, people like to really politicize, for example, African-American studies. The classes of African-American studies started in the 1960s, of course, as a result of the civil rights movement, but no one wants to critique thermodynamics, right? The first thermodynamics class was like in 16 something. We were still slaves. Y'all. Many of the classes that we currently see today, we were in Jim Crow. So while, white male so-and-so was taking a physics class, my grandmother had to walk through the back door just to get some food, right? These classes are fundamentally the same. So the same Fisher coefficient that racist eugenics as Fisher did, we're still using that today, right? So you telling me that we don't need like a complete overhaul of that? Like, you just want Black people to try to exist in that space? And we do, and we kill it, but we shouldn't have to, right? We should have a space that affirms us. I was reading the book, Isabel Wilkerson, and what she was saying about innovation is that, first of all, this whole ideology on the media that all Black folks did was pick cotton is so freaking untrue. We were the machinists. We were the designers. We even cut white folks' hair. Barbershops weren't even white. But when it came to innovation, some of the ideas were stolen. So all that stuff you hear about the traffic light, that's just half of the story. There's so many inventions and innovations that were just either stolen or buried. And I said, well, the stolen part I can understand, but why would it be buried? And she goes on to explain that when it comes to white supremacy and maintaining white supremacy, Blacks have to be seen as inferior, right? And if you invent all this machinery and make life better, even for your white slave owner, it will not fit the narrative of inferiority. So some stuff was just buried. That's why we're supposed to be flying in cars right now. And I'm not talking about the 6 billionaires who have them. Like, all of us, we have all suffered. When I'm thinking about Heather McGee, the other McGee, and it's so funny, she has an H in her last name. I was supposed to have an H in my last name, but when my great uncle went to fight in World War I, the sergeant said he didn't like the H and he took it out. Yeah, just see how they can just interrupt our entire identities like that. But what she says about the sum of us all is that we all suffer, right? And that's what I'm saying in my book. We are all suffering. And my one last point, I do not think the capitalistic version of we need more Black people in STEM so other white big tech owners can get rich. No, okay? We need more Black people in STEM because you shouldn't be an anti-racist. You shouldn't be, an anti-Black company. That's the reason, right? So we don't have to add to your capital in order to be seen as valuable, right? You get a bunch of white men who went to the same schools, same neighborhoods, et cetera, probably thinking the same kind of way. And you don't think about that way with them, but with us, for people of color, it has to be some kind of value proposition, right? you know? So that's why I'm with Langston. I'm sick of begging these white STEM companies. First of all, we here because they say they can't find us. We must be hiding somewhere. Like, we's here, y'all. We's here. Afrofuturism is right here. Just look at our HBCUs. And then once we do get there, we have these toxic toxic environments, and we don't stay. So you know what? Just give us the reparations and let us start our own thing. Go Langston. I'm with you, brother. 100%.
Yes, yes. So I know we're getting close on time and we got to open it up for the, guests to answer questions, but I want to take some time because in the afterword, it hit on my heartstrings in another way because you started talking about your mama, right? And I know my own relationship to my own mom. My mom passed in 2009, but what I did not know is when I was defending my dissertation in 2017, what all you had going on with your own mama, right? So I'm saying all that to say, because as I was reading that piece, it reminded me of a statement around like Black Girl Magic that Gloria Ladson-Billings made around, it was back at Hip Hop Literacies. I went to this conference with Dr. Sandra Lanehart, who I saw in the chat, so I gotta make sure I shout out my other academic auntie mama. And she was like, the magic ain't necessarily us whipping out wands, right? And it's not necessarily us just doing more with less, but it's what we pour into the future generation. Right. And so all that being said, I'm wondering, like, how do you see this? How do you further see this book as an extension of like your mother's work in her sunset, like working through you in her sunset, and how do you see it speaking to future generations?
Mm-hmm. I'm looking over to my son right now, Kari, because, this is a subject that's near and dear to both of our hearts. So on December 31st, 2017, my mom passed away in her sleep from cancer. And I was talking to a neighbor on the block, because, this is in Chicago. So like we talk to our neighbors, like, like that's the thing. We need to get back to that because, in Nashville, people, they won't talk to me. But anyway, I was talking to the neighbor and he was saying, he was counting the number of people who died on the block. And he was saying that there is something wrong with our water filtration, that is related to this. And I said, wow, that is a STEM issue. This is what would happen if we had an equity ethic in STEM. What I mean by that is you talk largely to people of color in STEM. They don't want to build bombs. They don't give a fuck about China. They want to better their communities, right? They want to solve racial justice, not just social justice. Let's call it what it is. Social justice is not us. They want to solve racial justice related issues, right? And imagine, when he put that on me, I just said, imagine if we had Black STEMers who were involved in this project, where we as a community, just community members could say, we think something is happening on our block, where all of our, people are dying much earlier than they should be, and we think something's in the water. How could we put that equity back in STEM? And all this messaging about, being a super de-duper power and building more nuclear bombs, this is not resonating with us. But folks want to know, why don't we have more STEMers of color? First of all, we do. You underestimating us. Like, we's here, we's out here. And secondly, we get, disenfranchised by wanting to do STEM and racial justice, and people not wanting to put that together. That's a beautiful marriage, goddamn it. That will make a better planet. Why don't you want that? NIH actually penalizes you, with that study, Fund Black Scientists. My sister, Dr. Lola, is one of the authors. NSF, not NSF, Lord, and I get NSF grants. Retract, NIH is what I'm trying to say, actually penalizes you, or the reviewers are more likely to penalize you if you have a communal component, if you have an equity ethic in your research. Like, we're not just doing science to be doing science, we're trying to better the world, right? And why isn't that message resonating? Like, who don't want to do that? right? We don't even know if 100 years, if our great-great-grandchildren will even have a place to, be. And if they can't play outside, we're thinking about domes and all kind of stuff. So yeah, we have some great grand challenges. And it came from that really, really personal experience, which helped me to understand the power of equity ethic and why we need to infuse that in STEM.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much. So before, if you have questions, if you could put those in the chat, that would be great. But before I go ahead and open this up, open that part up, I'm wondering what's something first, let me back up. One question I was gonna ask you, is the question you asked me in my dissertation defense. So it's so who is this book for? And how do you get them to change the curriculum based on reading this book? You can answer that question if you want to, but for somebody who hasn't read the book, why for somebody specifically outside of STEM, right? How would you engage them to read? Why would you say they need to read the book?
Well, a lot of people who are not in STEM think that they shouldn't be in STEM because they don't think that they can do good in the world and be in STEM. Many people of color we have our own racialized experiences, and we want to make the world a better place. We are the moral givers of the world. I'm here to tell you, forget what you heard. We are there, and STEM needs to make a space for folks like that, right? So STEM needs a straight up makeover. So I hope they can see some of the examples of equity ethic and talk about how we want to better our communities. We want to better people. We want to better folks' outcomes and see themselves in that work. But certainly for those who have read, and if you have read, a plea to you, the haters, the racist trolls are on Amazon giving me really negative book reviews. So if you've read, could you please, tell the truth? If it sucks, let somebody know. But if it doesn't, can you please provide a counter narrative against, some of somebody called it racist garbage, et cetera, et cetera. But for those who have read it, what I'm looking at is the future. So, I consider Afrofuturism, us Black people now, we are the Afrofuturists, right? We are the ones we want to see in the future, but also reimagining what could STEM look like if we were not just at the table, if we built the table, not just on the menu, but we created the menu, right? Right now, we are living in young white man's dreams. So when we go on Twitter, even though Twitter wasn't even shit until Black people got it, right? So we know we can spice up some stuff, but why can't we have our own Twitter? If we wanted to start a revolution tomorrow, and I do, what kind of cars do we drive? White people's cars. What kind of planes will we take? White people's planes. What kind of search engines will we use? White people's search engines. We ain't got nothing. I ain't gonna say nothing because when I say that, somebody will send me a link about the Black cell phone guy and all that stuff. So we do have some success, but nothing like on a grand scale that we need to. And we need to be in that. We just don't need to use Twitter and make it flavorful, right? Put the seasoning on it. We need to be the creators of that. So that's my plan for the revolution. That's what the book is about.
All right, this right on time. What is it, Dr. Johnson? I hope you heard that as the tech person here. No pressure, but pressure. So that said, I know some tech folks in the audience as well, but let's jump into these questions that's in the chat. So this first one is from Patrick, and he said, could you comment on how stereotype management goes beyond the concept of proving them wrong?
I do not, I really, first of all, thank you for the question. I don't think stereotype management is a good tool. I'm just going to say that. So I'm not touting, if everybody just used stereotype management, we would be okay. But it seems as though it's a necessity, right? Mm-hmm. So being able to be seen as talented, it has a very short life when it comes to Black people. So there's certain things that we have to do so we don't have to just exude so much energy improving our intellectual value. And some of those things, so some of the ways in which students move through their STEM educational and workplace spaces is to showcase really high grades, you know, or to talk about the summer that they spent in, what's the place with the dog, Martha's Vineyard, when they really just worked at the grocery store, right? So they don't have to, answer stereotypical questions, right? It's removing one Cinco de Mayo tattoo, you know, and co-opting whiteness. Now, you know, a lot of people say that's self-hatred, but I don't know if it's self-hatred or not. Everybody that I interviewed had to identify as Black or Latinx or an Indigenous. So the very fact that they identify with that population, you know, says that some of their racial identity, you know, is aligned with, you know, that kind of solidarity. But they did say the life was just easier moving through these places and spaces. But the reason why I don't think it's healthy is because even when the sister is at home working on her STEM homework by herself, she still feels the pressure to get every question right. And this pressure keeps her from going to the study group where, you know, y'all can split the love, right? You don't have to get all the questions right. Just bring something to the table, right? And it avoids her from going to the office hours, because the office hours reinforce her inferiority. So I want to get rid of stereotype management, but I want to acknowledge to people that it exists, because they just think that us 3.8ers, we just walking around without a care in the world, and you know, it's the farthest from the truth. It's the farthest from the truth.
Thank you for that. This next question said, I'm gonna read it. So I don't mess it up. It says, I'm asking this question as a queer brown immigrant who is a fixed term faculty in STEM. When I look at the composition of who are fixed term, it's women of color, and immigrants of color. Tenured faculty of color know this and are publishing data on it. But what is the plan that we have to dismantle this hierarchy of knowledge maintained by academia by naming the tenure process in fixed term people?
So fixed term, does that mean adjunct or maybe a practice professor?
I think like professor of practice.
Okay.
Yeah, so like not tenure track, okay. Probably adjunct.
Yeah. So, you know, that's a byproduct of capitalism as well. And, you know, capitalism and white supremacy goes together. So capitalism says we can work people to death with as little labor, with much more labor, with as little resources as possible. And white supremacy says, we're gonna make sure all those people are minoritized, right? So that's why you have high populations. So this is how the universities lie to you. They say, oh, we have 30% underrepresented minority faculty, but 90% of those faculty members are adjunct or professors of the practice, right? So we need to, and you know, Angela Davis said it, you know, you cannot dismantle racism without dismantling capitalism, right? So we got two interlocking systems working together. And remember, folks of color, particularly women of color, always get it first and worst, but guess what? Now's coming. Now's knocking on your door, right? Now is the, you know, white male professor. Now you running around to 4 different colleges trying to teach adjunct, right? So that's why we say it's okay to work on anti-Blackness, because when you fix anti-Blackness, you know, you're going to fix so many other problems as a result.
Thank you for that. Yes. This next question is like, have you found in your research any data on the effects of brown on Black bruising? I'm not really sure. Hold on. Have you found in your research any data on the effects of brown on Black bruising? In engineering, that seems to have a definite presence.
Oh, okay. So this is anecdotal. Don't don't blow me up. But what I've been told, so when I say brown, I'm also talking about Indigenous, but for this conversation, I'm just going to talk about Latinx people, that being white Latinx is a form of a assimilation that dark Latinx and Black people don't get to participate in. So the reason why the numbers of Latinx are always 4 to 5 points higher percentage-wise, still horrible, like don't get me wrong, still horrible, is because they said the white Latinx population is able to almost get like an honorary pass, through not racism, but like at the privileged racism level, right? So they're able to get some benefits. But I reminded people in my 2016 piece that, Black folks, we had a history of passing too, right? So this is not necessarily like a Latinx people problem. And, to be white Latinx doesn't necessarily mean that you are anti-Black, right? Because it's really deep and I'm still learning about it, but there is certainly room for the Latinx community and the Asian community, while we're at it, to look at their own ways in which they perpetuate anti-Blackness.
Thank you for that. Yes, indeed. So this next question is, what advice would you give for STEM staff, support staff in historically white institutions? What things should we be advocating for our students? How do we build the communal support?
This is an excellent question. I didn't spend enough time in the book talking about staff, and I greatly apologize for that, because it was the staff that was actually retention makers. So what I mean by that is the minority engineering program directors, as they have been historically called, I'm sure there's some better terms now, were the glue that kept Black students, brown students, Asian students, and other minoritized beings at the school. So if it wasn't for them, when I say, have you ever thought about times that you wanted to drop out? Sometimes it's a faculty, but the majority of time is staff member so-and-so who, came over my house and brought me some Kentucky fried, no. Because, Black people created fried chicken. So let me not use that, but brought me over some soul food or something like that. So they are really, really miracle workers. And what they need to be is acknowledged for that, right? If you are retaining a Black student and helping that white institution's numbers either remain, at those lowly levels, because, ain't nobody really, really doing great. Some people are doing greater than others. Or, you are retaining a Black STEMmer, you should get a lot of credit for that, and having material resources. So I would fight, I would hope if leadership was on that call, they would give you the material resources that you need so you can continue to be an advocate for Black students and other minoritized students.
Thank you so much. Okay, one more question and an
answer. ReAnna. Can I ask a follow up to that real quick? Then I know that's rude, just jumping in there like that.
It's no show.
But I done messed up a name and everything. I don't even know which one to say. That's why I'm calling by our first name, Roby, because I get. Anyways, let me stop being nervous on here. All right, so I'm reading the book, and I've been wrestling with the fact. And I asked Jelani Favors this, who wrote a really great book on the history of Black colleges.
Love that book.
He's also an Aggie, so Aggie pride. That's really why I wanted to say that, because he's an Aggie. Anyways, so I'm wrestling with the fact that I started off at A&T like you did, changed my life. I was a mediocre student. I wasn't, living up to my potential in like multiple aspects of my life before I got there. And I was educated at Ohio State. It was paid for, because somebody handed me off to Ohio State for my master's, right? And then somebody handed me off from Ohio State to University of Texas, where I got my doctorate. Mm-hmm. But I still, in my mind, like, I don't think these white schools are redeemable. I don't think they can be redeemed. I don't think the D&I stuff is going to work the way we think it's going to work. And I'm wrestling with the fact now that I think in some ways, I don't want to get in trouble. I think D&I is it's like reverse reparations. So the money that should be going to Black colleges or Hispanic serving institutions, tribal colleges, all this, that, and the third, those resources get siphoned into these predominantly white institutions that don't really do nothing with it. You know what I mean? They don't do nothing. So shouldn't that money first and foremost go to the money for D&I at Chapel Hill should be at A&T before it goes there. You know what I mean? Like, it should start with us, because those are the institutions that are causing the problem. These racist theories, these racist, you know, the racist statistics and formulas and all of that stuff came from these white institutions. So why would we expect them to have the solutions for our problems? I don't think the historically white institutions are redeemable when it comes to this. So I'm just wondering if you could speak to that.
Me being at a historically white institution and having a diversity and inclusion officer, I'm gonna be real careful about how I say this. But first of all, I think, you know, TSU is owed $50 million by the government, right? So when it comes to who should get the money, the government should give us the money that we deserve, first of all. The government should not be underfunding us. So now we have to rely on rich white people, you know, to be generous to do that. Like, what if they stop being generous? Then what's going to happen, right? So this is what I'm talking about, like redefining self-care. We pay enough in taxes for you to adequately fund HBCUs. We have Black, you know, first of all, my son wouldn't go to a historically white institution, right? You know, by mother's will and by his choice. But I teach Black students at those institutions every day, right? And further than that, I teach some white students who need me there, right? You know, like 83% of the teaching force is white, right? Who's gonna, like that, Black students aren't the only people that are caring for our children, caring for our schools, you know, head of STEM companies. Like, we need them to get some wokeness. And, you know, the term woke is just so played out, but, you know, they need some sources of support too. So I don't know if I would say that definitely the governments need to fund, and, you know, white folks, if you want to give HBCUs money, we'll take it. That's our reparations, you know, thank you, please, and thank you. But I also think that historically white institutions also need to do a major overhaul with their diversity and inclusion.
So I would say this. I just think the white schools already got the money. They already got the money. Just do what you're supposed to do. Y'all not getting no bonuses for doing the wrong thing. I feel like we're rewarding white institutions for the bad jobs that they have done historically, and they already got the money to do it.
So when that comes to my institution, that is absolutely correct. We have the money, Stanford, Harvard, et cetera. But many state universities have been defunded. Again, capitalism and Republicans, you know, are at fault here, where a state university used to be a viable way that the Black lower economic classes could go to a state university, but federal funding has really like just been decimated, right? So some of these things are not related to diversity and inclusion. It's related to capitalism and Republican control.
Yes, yes, and yes. So we're gonna keep going. We got one more question, unless somebody else dropped one in the chat. Tivy, one of my colleagues from UTSA, hey girl, says she's excited to purchase book and great conversation. Like, what would you say is the most important message our children need to hear? And I'm guessing it's within the context of the work that you do, but also maybe within the context of the book.
Well, I don't know if this is an ideal story, but you can do STEM and change the world at the same time. You do not have to think of those things as separate, right? However, STEM is not the great equalizer. So many people say, you know, I'm going to go in STEM and get rich. A Black Ph.D. in science and engineering, Ph.D. is making $30,000 less than their white counterpart. You don't believe me? Go to the National Science Foundation indicators, 30,000. So we definitely need to be fighting for equity, right? It's part of that. But the real message that I would want to leave students and younger people is that you can save the world via STEM. You are the ones we're looking for.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. And so we got another question in the chat, and I think this is interesting, right? It's like, because we've talked about this money piece, is like, where does Black philanthropy come into play in terms of funding Black institutions? And thinking about this, in addition to Black engineers, Black STEM PhDs making $30,000 less, but also having more debt. So where does philanthropy come into this as we think about funding Black HBCUs?
Black philanthropy is great, but let me tell you something about the racial wealth gap, right? I make good money. When my family member dies, I have to pay a lot for that because, you know, it may not be anybody else to have it, which reduces my ability to gain wealth, to give wealth to my HBCU, right? I'm trying to take care of my cousin back in Chicago who just got COVID, et cetera. But the racial wealth gap, the white medium household is making $111,000, has $111,000 in wealth. Do you want to know what the Black medium household has? 7,000, right? So we assume that Black people aren't doing their part. They ain't got it to give, right? Let's stop blaming us. And you know, I say that as I send my little $150 a month check to North Carolina A&T, you know, that's all I got right now because I have other responsibilities that I'm trying to take care of through my family, right? So we got to stop blaming Black folks, but, you know, send $50, you know, for this. And we got to put the blame where it's supposed to be, which is the government. It is their responsibility. It is our money that we pay the government that should be going back to feed and educate us, and it's not happening.
Dr. McGee, you on point. You say that and it reminded me, one lesson I learned when I was at Washington State, because I was in between my 9-month contract, I was working at the University Foundation, right? And here at Alcorn, the foundation was one office. At Washington State University in Pullman, Washington, 8 miles away from Idaho, the foundation was being rented in a 3-floor building that had multiple offices. And it was folks who hadn't even graduated from Washington State University who were being listed as benefactors. And the benefactor mean I done gave $150,000 at some point, right? Mm-hmm. It's not like one time, it could be, you know, and I think about like, how these folks, how I ain't even graduate from the school and I got $150,000 to give. Right. So I think you're definitely on point around what does this thing look like around make sure that the government pays, but I also think it's not, if we ain't got it, we ain't got it. So especially now also, what is Brittany Cooper just finished talking before you got on? Like, listen, around like Black women got like maybe got $5 to their name, right? Because we always giving money, sending money back home and take care of folks.
We are philanthropists. We are philanthropic. It's just we giving it to our families and our friends and meeting their immediate needs first, you know. So don't say we don't give. All we do is give, Lord, you know. Yes.
Okay, so one more question. It says, Dr. McGee, what is your advice for the bruised who may have wanted to stay within academia, but after the bruise and want to go into non-academic careers to attempt to help change the system and better the experiences of incoming Black STEM students?
If you are working for yourself, that is great. If you are going into industry or something non-academic to think that there's a better life there, I'm sorry, it's not. It's reproduced, this kind of toxic environment is reproduced in non-for-profits, it's reproduced at think tanks, it's reproduced in so many, you know, different levels, different devils, y'all. I'm just here to tell you. So people leave the academy thinking that they're going to go to this, kumbaya industry or kumbaya company, and it's either the same or it's worse. I also think that we as faculty don't do a good enough job talking about the benefits of being a faculty member. Like, I'm getting a couple of months of summer salary this year. That's extra money on top of my paycheck, right? I don't have to go into work, even before COVID. You have to take a walk around the office, you know, just because you're the Black person and people gonna be checking for you. But, you know, I did that maybe like once a week. You know, I could be in Jamaica right now having this conversation. I'm not, I'm in Nashville, but you know, you see what I'm saying? There's a lot of benefits. And I think we as Black faculty members, that sometimes we salivate over the things that are wrong and we forget to tell people the things that are right. The reason why I think this is so important is because a small cohort of Black STEM faculty can change STEM. right? We are the ones who teach the Google founders, the Microsoft founders, right? If they see us and we're able to instill a different narrative with them, they might go and do better things with their STEM and stop surveilling us and trying to control us through these damn cameras. That's another story for another day, but
listen.
Yes.
So, okay, I think, what is it? Okay, we got one more question. I think what you said is a reminder, you know, like structured systems are maintained by people, right? And so the reality is whether it's higher ed, K-12, government, whatever, it's the same kinds of people, they cousins, they related, that's maintaining some of the bids. And so the follow-up was like, what about science policy? Like, I guess if that could be a space, an arena to do the good work.
Yes, Lord, that's where we need to be. That is where so that is my next professional development, right? I don't do enough to take my research into policy implications and changing policy. That is where it's at. Whoever this brother or sister is, I'm with you. I can share some resources. I've been looking this up. So, you know, be sure to send me an email or reach out on LinkedIn. That is the way to go. And I'm glad that somebody, you know, who we need is going to be in that space. Absolutely.
Cool beans. So I think we are nearing our time. Dr. Clark, is there anything else? I know Dr. Johnson might have had to jump off. I don't know yet, but she's still
I think she's still here. She's still here. So I'm going to ask Ebony real quick, if you could just type in the chat where people can get your book. I'm going to ask Amber, Dr. Johnson, if you could again type in the chat the information that you shared about where to follow you on Twitter, on Instagram, where to find out information for the Black Girls Code fundraiser. And ReAnna, I'm gonna ask you to do the same thing. So if people want to reach out to you and contact you for the dope things that you're doing in the world. Before we sign off, before y'all all just leave the Zoom, I'm gonna ask y'all to stay on just a little bit longer because I want to talk about the next events that we have coming up. So if y'all give me 1 second, I'm gonna share my screen so you can see next month on May 6th. We're taking a break in April. So May 6th at 7 p.m., the same time as we hosted this one, Central Time. We have a conversation with Dr. Carolyn Finney, who is an environmentalist and an activist. And we're having that in conversation with a good brother here in San Antonio named Alex Daly, who founded a nonprofit organization called Black Outside that aims to get Black children more integrated with the outdoors. And I'm not just talking about going outside to play. I mean, like camping out in the wilderness, like with the bears at Yellowstone Park and all of that good stuff. So that's going to be a great conversation. It does have STEM implications for the way that we think about the way Black folk interact with the earth and the natural environment. And so if you want to go ahead and register for that one, you can use your phone on the QR code that's on the screen right now. And all of the money that we raise for that donated ticket is going to go to support Black Outside. And there's going to be an interesting history lesson there as well, because back in the I don't want to get the decade wrong, but maybe 20s, 30s, there was a Black woman here in San Antonio that started an outdoors camp called Camp Founder Girls for Black girls, because the Black girls couldn't get involved with the Girl Scouts. And so there's going to be some interesting history told there as well. So that is our event for May 6th. And also what we have after that is a conversation with Isaiah Jackson, who is, I guess I kind of want to call him, he's like a Bitcoin activist. So he's trying to educate Black folk on how to use Bitcoin, or basically what the basics of blockchain technology is when it comes to, you know, our finances and economics and how Black people can take advantage of those opportunities. He's not like a financial expert or anything like that. So don't come back and sue me if Bitcoin goes to zero and you put your money in there, okay? And then there's a good brother named Dimitri Bird, who is the founder of a nonprofit called 300 Seconds that does really good work here in the community in San Antonio for children going back to school, mentoring Black and brown kids here in San Antonio as well. And he's kind of like a lay, he's not a lay expert. He's just like a blockchain nerd all on his own. So we talk about Black genius, people who didn't go to college and take the traditional route, but is self-educated. That is his passion, and he tries to share that with as many people as he knows. And so again, if you register for that event and you make a donation, a portion of those donations will go to support 300 Seconds, because that's part of what we try to do here at Entrepreneurial Appetite. If we aren't supporting a Black entrepreneur that has a for-profit business, we try to partner with some nonprofit businesses as well. Want to thank all of you for joining us today.